Hello, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we will be talking about modern strategies for requirements gathering. I am Crystal Leone, a senior project manager at Advisicon. So, today we want to talk about who is Advisicon and who am I? Why is gathering requirements important? What are some of our strategies for gathering requirements, different tools and techniques that we use, and then we're going to wrap it up with a summary. So, here at Advisicon, our incredible team of trainers, developers, and technology consultants want to help you maximize your productivity and impact. And we do that through a blend of technology and methodology consulting. I am Crystal Leon, a certified project management professional and senior project manager at Advisicon. I have experience managing all different types of projects. I have over 10 years of project management experience with prior experience in research and development and working on government contracts. I've managed projects with budgets ranging from $50,000 to $10 million, so far and wide. Lots of different projects that I have managed with lots of different budget ranges. And I'm hoping to share some of the things that I have learned along the way with you. So we're going to start it off with a quote here. Woody Williams said, "No matter how good the team or how efficient the methodology, if we're not solving the right problem, then the project fails." And I think that this is a really important quote, especially when we're talking about requirements, because like it says, it doesn't matter how good the team is or how hard they work, or how good the methodology is. If we're not solving the right problem, if we're not delivering on the requirements that were set forth, then the project is not successful. So, why is requirements gathering important? Well, let's first start by talking what is a requirement. According to the Project Management Book of Knowledge, or the PMBOK, for those of you who are familiar, a requirement is a condition or capability that is required to be present in a product, service, or result to satisfy a contract or other formally imposed specification. So basically, everything we deliver is based on requirements. We cannot deliver something to the customer if we don't know what they want or what they need. And additionally, we have to decipher if they're coming to us with a solution, then it's our job to drill down that solution to the requirements that are needed to obtain that solution. It also helps to manage risk. Knowing what the requirements are and how they affect the project helps us to plan for the unknowns. For example, if a customer is wanting a specific product that needs a certain little computer chip, but that computer chip has a 1 year lead time, it's good to know about that up front and help set the expectations with the customer or find alternatives. Knowing this information upfront will certainly help to reduce risk down the road. So, if you're a project manager, I am sure that at some point you have seen this sketch. And this sketch basically is kind of a little bit of a not so funny, I would say, a depiction of how things happen throughout the project management life cycle. So you'll have your customer explain this tree swing where it's on one branch and three different little seats. And then the project manager understood it as being on two different branches and only one seat. And then as communication goes down from one to the other, the next is the analyst designed it with two tree branches holding up the tree with a big slice in the middle and the tree swing being in between. And then the programmer wrote it to be where the swing is not on the branches, but on the trunk of the tree, and the seat is on the ground. But what they found out in the end is that the customer really just wanted a tire swing. And I think that this is important on a couple of different levels here. One, it's really important to understand what the customer is looking for at the beginning, and defining those requirements are really, really important. So, do they want three seats or do they only want one seat? I think that's really important. And that's part of what we're going through this exercise for, is to find out why are our requirements so important. And then, secondly, I want to mention that it's also important to note that from the first picture to the last picture, um, it appeared that they wanted a wooden seat as the swing, but what they really wanted at the end was a tire swing, which was round and a tire and completely different. But I think it's important here to note that the requirements can change throughout the project. And so maybe what they think that they want at the beginning, after they learn more about it, or maybe see a prototype of it, things of that nature, they decide, you know what, that's not what we want at all. We still want to swing, but we want it to be made of completely different material in a different shape. And so it's important to note that requirements can change throughout the project. So, some strategies for gathering requirements is that it's so important to know and understand your stakeholders. And one way to do this is by completing or conducting a stakeholder analysis. This is a way to gather information on who the stakeholders are, what their interests are, and whose interests should be taken into consideration through the project, and whose interests are most important. It's also important to know who is driving the requirements. Why is it important to this person and why do they have such an influence? As mentioned, I have previous experience working on government contracts, and one in particular I find is very important to talk about when we're trying to know and understand our stakeholders. So, one project that I had worked on, it was a contract through the Army. And so the Army held the contract, they funded it, and their contract deliverables were listed throughout. So we had to make sure that we complied with the contract that the Army had given us. However, the contract was being driven um, by people at the Air Force. And so this contract was to develop a product that would primarily be used by the Air Force. And so the Air Force was the one who was driving the end user requirements. They were going to be the ones that were going to be using it on their planes. And so they needed to make sure that they had a vested interest as well, because they needed to make sure that the product met their requirements on various levels, such as being safe to fly. And then finally, the Defense Logistics Agency was going to be the purchaser of the product, and they were going to be the ones who were going to put it into inventory. And so as I mention each of these things, it looks like it could get a little complicated. And who are you supposed to be listening to? And who is driving these requirements? Is it the person who's holding the contract and funding it? Is it the person who's going to be using the product? Is it going to be the person who's purchasing the product for the end user to be able to use? And it's a really interesting dynamic to figure out whose opinion is most important. And I say this to say that it changes from project to project. It's not always going to be the person who funds it, and it's not always going to be the end user. And I think that it's important to note that it's so important to do your stakeholder analysis to know who's driving the project and who's driving the requirements on this project, because everybody's opinion matters and they have a reason for being interested in the project and for wanting it to have certain requirements. But it is also important to note that whoever is driving these requirements isn't always the person that's going to be paying for the project, and it's not always the person that's going to be acquiring the project in the end. So it's important to know who your stakeholders are, what their vested interest is, and who's going to be the one that's going to sign off the project as being complete, and know that who's driving these requirements is going to vary from project to project. It's not always going to be the same stakeholder. So it is important to know who the stakeholders are and understand what their intentions are. Next, it's important to know if their need is a requirement. So requirements make up a solution. If the solution is what's given to you, then it's important for you to drill down to what the requirements are that will give them the solution that they're needing. It's also important when gathering requirements to focus on the actual requirements that are needed to deliver the product and not only focus on the solution. And then finally, I want to mention to ask why. Bring out your inner child and ask why. So if they give you a requirement, ask them why that's a requirement. And then they'll give you an answer to that. And then ask why again. Why is that what's needed? And they'll give you another answer and then ask why again. And by the time you get down to three, four, five levels of why, I think that at that point you will have your requirement actually defined. And I think that sometimes in this, you'll define your requirements, and then there will be other times where you'll find that the requirement is not actually needed. What they actually thought that they wanted isn't actually what they need. And asking that why question over and over and over again helps to drill down to what is the actual requirement and why is it needed for their solution or for their deliverable. So, another strategy for gathering requirements is negotiate. Don't be afraid to negotiate the requirements with your customer. Understanding what's in your wheelhouse, what are your capabilities, and what aren't your capabilities is really important. And being able to convey that to the customer will, one, negotiate their needs into something that you can actually deliver, and two, help to set expectations of what you can provide. I have two kids, two boys. They're 8 and 5 years old. And every night at bedtime, there are some pretty intense negotiations that happen in our house, such as one more show and I promise I won't be tired in the morning, or one more bedtime story and I'll fall asleep really fast, or my mouth is really dry. I just need a sip of water before I can go to sleep. Bring out your inner child and negotiate to find some common ground, to find something that both parties can agree to, something that you can deliver, something that will meet their needs. It's okay to negotiate those requirements with a customer and making sure that they are within the capabilities of something that you can provide. And then it's really important to understand what are the customer's must haves and what are their nice to haves. So, understanding what their must haves are going to help you to develop your list of requirements and your priorities. The nice to haves are what's going to help you to build your list of extras or bells and whistles that's going to make your customer extra happy. So your must-haves are going to be defining your requirements, and then you can implement those nice-to-haves when you have the time and budget to do so, but they won't be defined as a requirement. So it's really important to talk with your customer and figure out what is actually a requirement and what is just something that they want to have extra or would be kind of the cherry on top. So, communication is so important on both sides of the project. It's so important to keep your customer informed of your progress throughout the project, but it's really also important for them to stay in constant communication with you as well, especially if any of their requirements are going to be changing. And I mention this because requirements do change. While it may seem that requirements are gathered only at the beginning of the project, that's true. They are gathered at the beginning of the requirement because it gives you a starting point. I want to mention that requirements gathering is done throughout the project. Requirements change, and you need to be prepared for this. Implementing the change is so much easier when the product isn't finalized and there's still room to move and to change and to negotiate those requirements. And so it is common for it to change. In research and development, it was common for us to build a prototype for our customer, have them test it out. And then sometimes you would find that maybe something they thought was a requirement doesn't actually work for them and they need to amend those requirements. And so it's really important to be aware that requirements can change throughout, and being flexible and knowing that and being prepared for that can really help as you move throughout the project life cycle. It's really important to also document the changes throughout the project. Um, as gathering requirements happens throughout, as mentioned. So document them, document what the requirements are at the beginning of the project, and then document if any new requirements are added, if any of the requirements have been removed or changed or amended. It's really important to keep that documentation throughout the project, especially on the requirements. And then finally, be honest about what is and what isn't working. This will help you and the customer to know if any of the requirements need to be modified, added, or removed. If it's working for you, great. But if it isn't working, tell the customer that, let them know. And then you can brainstorm together to be able to find some common ground or a different solution. So, next, when you are ready to deliver your product, this is a time where you have your requirements delivery. This is where you can show how your deliverable meets the requirements that were set forth in the project charter or the statement of work. And this can be done in various different ways. Sometimes you show that your deliverable meets the requirements by demonstrating it, showing them the product, showing them the software, letting them see that it meets all the requirements that they were looking for. Another way to do this is through simulation. Sometimes you can't show the product in the environment that they're looking for, but maybe you can show it in a relevant environment, something similar. Simulate that product in a relevant environment to show them that it can work and it can meet their needs. Another way to show that your deliverable meets the requirements is by calculation. Um, Showing them the information that, look, hey, this can work. We've tested it based off of this data. We show that it's going to work in the environment that you're looking for, and that we can meet your requirements by this. So basically, you need to show how your deliverable meets the requirements that were set forth. um, and I will mention, it's acceptable to not deliver on every requirement. That's okay, but it's not acceptable for that to be a surprise to the customer. It's really important to stay in constant communication with your customer and make sure that they know what they're getting from you. And then finally, manage expectations. It's really important to manage your customers' expectations. I like to use the Rolls Royce versus the Honda situation here. When you're going into your final meeting to deliver your final product, deliver your deliverable, you don't want your customer expecting a Rolls Royce with top of the line, all the bells and whistles, and then actually get a Honda. And I'm not knocking Hondas. Hondas are great. They get you from point A to point B. But when you put them side by side next to a Rolls Royce, they don't really compare. And so it's really important to make sure that you manage your customers' expectations and make sure that they know what they're getting when they go into that room, or when they're getting your final product. Make sure that they know what to expect, what requirements are being met, what nice to haves are being met, what were you able to accomplish for them, and make sure that they're expecting that and that they're not going to be leaving disappointed. All right, so let's move on to some tools and techniques that we can use to gather requirements. We've talked a lot about different strategies, as well as why gathering requirements is important. So let's talk about some of the tools to actually get those requirements that you're looking for. So, one of the things that you can do is interview your stakeholders one on one or as a group to learn more about their needs. This is a great time to ask your why questions to drill down to the actual requirements. Next, you can do some questionnaires or surveys. Once again, getting your stakeholders to fill out a survey or a questionnaire can be a really great source of information. These can also be done anonymously to bring out more honesty and where the needs are coming from. Could also be a good opportunity to bring up things that maybe haven't been thought of yet, or that someone didn't feel comfortable about bringing up in like a focus group or an interview or a workshop. Focus groups are another good opportunity, a good tool to use to bring together some stakeholders or subject matter experts to learn about their attitudes towards the product or the solution. Brainstorming, general information gathering to help define your requirements, talking about different needs by the team members or subject matter experts, and just informally going through what they want the product to look like is a really great opportunity for brainstorming. Benchmarking is something that I really like as a technique for gathering requirements. This is where you compare your planned or actual practices or products, and then helps to identify rooms, areas for improvement, or some of the best parts of it. So if you're looking at a product that you already have and you want to make it better, benchmark it against something you already have. What do you like about that thing? What do you not like about that thing? And then take those things to help you define your requirements. Prototypes are another great tool to make sure that you're on the right track to fulfilling the requirements or needs of the customer. This also gives the customer an opportunity to look at the product in a preliminary form and give them the opportunity to try it out, test it out, um, and make changes before the design or product has been finalized. It's so much easier to make changes before the product has been finalized, and a prototype is a great opportunity to test that out. Next are observations, viewing individuals or a product in its environment, what's working, what's not working, and then define the requirements based off of that observation. And then finally, facilitated workshops are a great opportunity to bring together groups. So this is going to be similar to a focus group, but it's going to be more cross functional, include all of the stakeholders together to define the requirements. So, not all of these techniques are needed for every project, but it is a good start to begin thinking about the best way to get the information we need to build out our list of requirements to be able to deliver what the customer is looking for. Some additional tools that you can use is a requirements management plan. I just want to mention that this is something that should be done in your project management plan before the requirements are ever even gathered. This is a opportunity to describe how the requirements will be gathered, analyzed, documented, and managed. So this is a great tool to use before you start gathering requirements. And then requirements documentation. This is something that should be done throughout the project lifecycle, is showing how each requirement meets the business need for the project. So writing down each requirement and showing how that's fulfilling the need of the project. And then finally, a requirements traceability matrix is another tool that you can use. It's a document that links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. Here is an example of one from the fifth edition of the PMBOK. And you can see how it will list each requirement, how it meets the business needs or objectives, how it meets the project needs and objectives, which work breakdown structure deliverable it applies to, and if it's part of the product design or product development. And so this is another great tool that you can use to make sure that your requirements are matching up to your deliverables. So, in summary, just want to talk about how important requirements are because they help define the deliverable. Everything that we deliver is based off of requirements, and that is why requirements gathering is so important. When gathering requirements, it's important to know who your stakeholders are. Why are they important? Why are they part of the project? And whose interests are driving the project? Communicate with your team and your stakeholders on the progress of the project and be prepared for requirements changes throughout the project. Know your limitations or expertise and use these to negotiate the requirements with the customer. Document the plan, the requirements, and how those requirements meet the project deliverable, and deliver a product to the defined requirements. Remember, set expectations with the customer. Don't let it be a surprise if you can't meet every single one of the requirements. And lastly, we mentioned that some tools and techniques that can help you to gather requirements. So, thank you so much for attending our webinar today. We appreciate the time that you took out of your day to listen. If you like what you hear and think that we can be of assistance to you and your organization, please feel free to find us on social media or reach out to us by phone or email. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.